A tear hit the folded triangle of cloth and soaked into the stars. Then another. Then another. The man's shoulders began to shake. His big, scarred hands closed around the flag like he was holding a body. He pressed it to his chest and made a sound that wasn't a word. It was the sound a man makes when something inside him finally breaks. Around him, 200 motorcycles sat in silent rows. Riders in leather stood at a distance, watching. None of them moved. None of them spoke. They knew that sound. They had heard it from other men. They had made it themselves on long nights. The man's name was Earl Whitman. The flag in his hands had been folded for someone he had loved for 53 years. What that small boy did next would bring 200 bikers to their feet. Stay with me on this one. He came every year. Same Sunday in May. Same bike. Same flag in the saddlebag. The men called it the Patriot Run. It started 51 years ago with 8 veterans and a promise. Now it ended every spring in a small park outside a town that most maps didn't bother naming. 200 motorcycles. 200 riders. All of them veterans, or sons of veterans, or grandsons of men who never came home. They wore patches that said things like Iron Cross Veterans Riders. They wore old field jackets over leather vests. Some had silver beards down to their belts. Some had a service ribbon stitched right above the heart. A few wore black armbands that meant they had buried a brother that year. Earl Whitman had ridden every one of those 51 runs. He was 76 years old. He stood 6'2". His back was straight in a way that told you he had once been a soldier and never quite stopped being one. His hands were thick and rough and marked with the scars of 7 decades. His face had the kind of lines that come from squinting into too much sun and holding back too much feeling. He was the kind of man other men listened to. He was the kind of man who didn't say much. This year, the brothers had noticed something. Earl had arrived alone. Usually his wife Margaret rode behind him. This year, no Margaret. Word had moved quietly through the rows of bikes, the way it moves through any family that knows each other's hearts. Margaret had passed in February. Cancer. Quick. They said Earl had sat beside her hospital bed and held her hand and never let go until the nurses had to pry his fingers loose. Nobody bothered him about it. That isn't how the brotherhood works. You let a man come. You let him sit. You let him cry or not cry. You hold the space. That's the whole thing. So when Earl pulled into the park that Sunday morning, every rider noticed. And every rider looked away. Because looking would have been pressure. And pressure is the last thing a grieving man needs. He parked at his usual spot. He took the folded flag out of his saddlebag. He carried it to the picnic table under the big oak tree, where he had carried it for 51 years. The flag had a name written on a small white tag stitched to one corner. The name was Daniel Reeves. The year was 1969. The brothers knew that name. They had heard the story 100 times in pieces, on long rides and around late campfires. Danny Reeves, Earl's best friend since the 2nd grade. They had enlisted together. They had landed in Vietnam together. And on a hot afternoon in a village whose name nobody could pronounce, a piece of metal had come through a doorway aimed at Earl's chest. And Danny had moved. Just moved. Stepped in front of him without a word, without a thought, the way only a brother moves. That was the flag. That was the man inside the triangle. Earl had been carrying it for 53 years. Now here's the thing about this particular day. Around the edges of the gathering, a small food truck had set up. A woman was buying a sandwich and a juice box. She had a little boy holding the corner of her jacket. The boy was small. 6 years old, maybe 7. He had brown hair that needed cutting. He had a toy soldier in his back pocket, half sticking out. He was the kind of kid who paid attention to everything and said nothing. His name was Caleb. His mother's name was Sarah. She was 31. She had not planned to be at a veterans rally that morning. She had planned to take her son to the lake, because the lake was free and the lake had ducks and the lake didn't ask any questions. But the lake had been closed for some reason she couldn't remember, and the road had taken her past this park, and Caleb had pointed at all the motorcycles and asked if they could just stop and look. And Sarah had said yes, because Sarah said yes to almost everything Caleb asked these days. Her husband Mark was on a 14-month deployment. He was 7 months in. She didn't tell Caleb that the phone calls were getting shorter. She didn't tell him about the news she'd been reading. She just bought him a juice box and let him stand close to the men in leather, because she didn't know any other way to give him men in the absence of his father. Caleb was watching everything. He was watching the bikes. He was watching the patches. And then he saw the old man under the oak tree, crying into a folded flag. The boy let go of his mother's jacket. Sarah didn't notice at first. She was paying the food truck guy and counting back change. When she turned, Caleb was already 20 feet away, walking slowly toward the oak tree. She started to call his name. Then she stopped, because every biker in the park was watching. 200 men in leather. 200 sets of eyes. None of them moving. None of them speaking. All of them watching this small child walk across the grass toward the old man under the tree. A few of the younger riders shifted, like they wanted to move and didn't know if they should. One stepped forward and put his hand on the back of the picnic bench where Earl was sitting. He was a big man with a black bandana on his head. His patch said Iron Cross VRA. His name was Marcus. He started to take another step toward the boy, to intercept him, to redirect him gently away from a private moment. But before he could, a hand came down on his shoulder. The hand belonged to the oldest man in the chapter. 68 years old. Beard as white as paper. The patch on the front of his vest said President. They called him Hammer. He had been doing this longer than any of them. He had buried more brothers than he could count on both hands. Let him go, Hammer said quietly. Marcus looked at him. Hammer, that's a kid. He doesn't know what he's walking into. That's exactly why. Marcus didn't move again. The boy reached the picnic table. Earl didn't see him at first. Earl's hands were still wrapped around the flag, and his eyes were closed, and his face was turned down. Tears were dropping onto the back of his right hand and running down between his knuckles. Caleb stopped about 3 feet from him. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. The wind moved through the leaves. A motorcycle bell jingled somewhere far away. Otherwise, nothing. After about 30 seconds, Earl opened his eyes. He saw the boy. For a moment, he didn't know what to do with his face. He tried to fix it. He tried to wipe at his cheeks with the back of his wrist. He tried to smile, the way men try to smile when they get caught. Hey, buddy, he said. His voice came out thick. You okay? You lose your mom. Caleb shook his head. She's at the truck. Okay. You should probably head back to her, son. Caleb didn't move. He was looking at the flag in Earl's hands. Is that your friend? He asked. Earl's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. What did you say? In the flag, Caleb said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Is that your friend in there? Earl looked down at the triangle of stars in his palms. He had been holding it for 53 years. Nobody had ever asked him that. Not in those words. Yeah, he said. Yeah, that was my friend. What was his name? Earl swallowed hard. His name was Danny. The boy nodded slowly. He thought about that for a few seconds. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out the small green plastic soldier he had been carrying. It was an old one, the kind with a rifle and a base and a permanent expression on its face. He set the soldier on the picnic table next to Earl's hand. That can be for Danny, he said. Something inside Earl moved. Something that had been frozen for a long time. Son, that's your toy. I have more at home, Caleb said. Danny doesn't have any. Earl made a sound that was almost a laugh. It was the first sound like that he had made in months. He picked up the plastic soldier carefully, the way you handle something valuable. He held it next to the flag. That's a fine soldier, he said. Danny would have liked that. Caleb climbed up onto the picnic bench next to him. Not asking, just doing. He swung his legs. Tell me about Danny, he said. Earl looked at this child. This stranger. This kid who had wandered out of nowhere and asked the one question nobody else had thought to ask in 53 years. He told him. He told him Danny was the kind of friend who would give you his last Coke. He told him Danny could whistle through his teeth louder than anyone in the platoon. He told him Danny had a sister named Linda, and a dog named Cooper, and a girl back home named Mary Bate. He told him Danny had said on the boat over that he wasn't scared of dying. He was just scared of dying for nothing. He didn't tell him how Danny died. He couldn't. Not to a child. But he told him, in his own way, that Danny had been the best person he had ever known. The boy listened the way only small children listen. With his whole body. Not waiting to talk. Not preparing a response. Just receiving. When Earl ran out of words, the boy nodded. He sounds like a good friend, Caleb said. He was the best friend. The bikers were still watching from 20 yards away. They couldn't hear the words. They could just see the old man and the small child sitting on the bench, the folded flag between them, the little green soldier standing guard. Some of the bikers had taken their hats off without realizing. Marcus, the big man with the bandana, had to turn his face away. Hammer was just standing there with his arms folded across his chest. Watching the whole thing. Sarah had walked halfway across the park and stopped. She didn't want to break the spell. She just stood there with her takeout bag in her hand, waiting. For one long moment, everything in that park seemed to settle. Earl took a deep breath. He let it out slowly. He picked up the little plastic soldier and put it carefully in the pocket of his vest. He patted it gently, like he was telling it to stay put. He looked at the boy. He smiled. A real one this time. Small. Broken at the edges. But real. Thank you, son, he said. It seemed in that moment like the worst of it was over. That's what everyone thought. That's what Earl thought. That's what the brothers thought, standing back at a respectful distance, finally starting to breathe again. Sarah took a step forward. She raised a hand and called softly, Caleb. Come on, honey. Let the gentleman be. The boy slid off the bench. And then he turned back to Earl. And he asked one more question. He stood there in the grass. Small hands at his sides. Eyes wide and steady on the old man's face. Mister, he said, did Danny know you loved him? The whole park stopped breathing. Earl's mouth came open. No sound came out. It was the kind of question nobody else had thought to ask. Nobody knew you could ask it. Nobody knew it could be that simple. Earl couldn't speak. His hands started to shake again. Not like before. Worse. Like the bottom had dropped out. Sarah, halfway across the park, stopped walking. She had heard her son's question, even though he hadn't said it loud. And she knew, the way a mother knows, that her son had just said something he didn't fully understand the weight of. She covered her mouth with her hand. The bikers had begun to move closer. Not all at once. Just a few steps. The way men close in around a brother who is hurting. Hammer was the closest. Marcus a few steps behind him. A man with a long gray beard the brothers called Wrench was off to the right, near a tree, with one hand against the bark like he needed it. Caleb didn't notice them. He was still looking at Earl. And Earl was struggling. "Son," Earl said. His voice was almost gone. "Son, you've got to understand. We were just kids. We were soldiers. We didn't talk like that. We didn't say those words." "Why not?" Earl let out a sound that was half breath, half laugh, half something neither of those. "Because that's not how men were back then. That's not how we did it." Caleb thought about that. He nodded slowly. The way kids nod when they're not actually agreeing, but they want to be respectful. Then he said, "I tell my daddy I love him every night." Earl looked at him. "My daddy's a soldier," Caleb said. "He's far away. Mama puts the phone on speaker, and we say it before we go to bed. He says it back. Even the nights he's tired. Even the nights he can't really hear us. He still says it." Earl was staring at this child like he had appeared out of a dream. "Where is your dad, son?" "Afghanistan," Caleb said. He pronounced it carefully, like a word he had practiced. "He comes home in October." Earl closed his eyes. He nodded. He nodded for a long time, like he was agreeing with something nobody had said out loud. "Now let me pause here for 1 second. If you're still with me, and this story is hitting you the way it hit a lot of people that day, hit that subscribe button so I can keep telling these. There are a lot more like this one. Now back to the picnic table." Caleb stepped closer. "Mister," he said. "Yeah, son. Did you ever tell Danny?" Earl opened his eyes. He looked at the flag. He looked at the small white tag with the name on it. "No," he said. "Not even once. Not even once. Not the way you mean." The boy looked confused. He wasn't accusing. He was just trying to understand. "Why?" Earl couldn't answer. He genuinely couldn't. Because the real answer was that he'd been 19 years old, and he had been a boy from a small town where men didn't say those things, and then he had been a man in a war where you didn't say those things, and then he had been a husband and a father and a grandfather, and at every single step of the way, he had not said it. And now the person he hadn't said it to had been gone for 53 years, and there was no way to undo any of it. He just shook his head. Caleb reached up and took Earl's right hand. The boy's hand was very small. Earl's was very big. The small one closed around 2 fingers of the big one. "You can tell him now," Caleb said. "Son, it doesn't work like that." "Yes, it does. He's gone, buddy. He's been gone a long time. My grandma said," Caleb said carefully, "that when you tell someone you love them and they're already gone, it travels faster. Because they're already up there listening. They've got nothing to do but listen." Earl let out a sound. It was a sound none of the bikers had ever heard him make. Hammer turned his face up to the sky and closed his eyes. Marcus put his hand over his mouth. Wrench by the tree leaned his forehead against the bark. Caleb didn't let go of Earl's hand. "Mister," he said, "you can say it out loud. We won't laugh." Earl was looking at the flag. His whole body had gone still. The shaking had stopped. Something inside him had walked all the way down to the bottom of a long stairway, and now it was looking up. He took a breath. It went all the way to the bottom of his lungs. He let it out slow. He started to speak. He whispered something first. His lips moved. His head was bowed. The words barely cleared his teeth. Caleb leaned forward. He cocked his head, the way kids do when they're trying to hear something. "Mister," he said gently. "He can't hear you whispering." Earl's shoulders shook. Just once, like a small earthquake passing through a building. Then he lifted his head. He looked straight at the folded triangle of cloth. He spoke. "Danny," he said. His voice cracked. He started over. "Danny, I should have told you, brother. I should have told you 1,000 times. Before we shipped out. On the boat over. Every single one of those nights in the jungle. Every time you handed me your last Coke. Every time you covered me. Every time you laughed at one of my bad jokes." He stopped. He took another breath. "I should have told you the morning of. I should have told you when you came back from that patrol, with your boots covered in mud. I should have told you the night before, when we sat by that fire, and you talked about Mary Bate and what kind of house you wanted to build her." He was crying again now, but it was a different kind of crying. Not the kind where you're trying to hold it in. "I should have told you, Danny. I'm telling you now. I love you, brother. I have loved you for 53 years, and every one of those years it has been my fault that I never said the words out loud. So I'm saying it now. I love you, Danny Reeves. I have loved you every day. I have missed you every day. I have lived for you every day. And I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry I waited so long. I'm sorry it took a 6-year-old boy to walk up to me and ask me a question." His hand tightened around the flag. "I love you, Danny." He bowed his head. It was done. For a few seconds, the park made no sound at all. Then there was a movement. Marcus stood up. He didn't make a show of it. He had been on one knee in the grass, and he just rose slowly, like a man getting to his feet at a graveside. Then Hammer stood. Then the man next to Hammer. Then a row of 3 behind them. Then a whole cluster, the way pigeons come up off a roof when one of them moves. Wrench by the tree pushed off and stood at attention. He took the bandana off his head and held it against his chest with both hands. The bikers stood. Not in a wave. Not in a planned formation. One by one, in 2s and 3s, 200 men got to their feet. They were not standing at attention. They were not saluting. They were just standing. The way you stand when something bigger than you has just walked into the room, and you don't know how to be sitting in front of it. Some of them had tears running down into their beards. Some of them had their hands over their hearts. Some of them just had their hands by their sides, palms open, the way people hold their hands when there's nothing in them anymore. 200 veterans. Standing. Earl noticed the silence first. Then he looked up. He saw them. He saw 200 men on their feet around him. He didn't know what to do with his face. He looked at Hammer. Hammer just nodded at him. The smallest nod. The kind that means we saw. We heard. We're here. Caleb didn't understand any of it. The boy looked at all the men standing around him. He stepped closer to Earl. He held on to the old man's leg, a little scared. Earl put his hand on the boy's head. Then something else started happening. Marcus moved first. He walked back to his bike. He opened his saddlebag. He took out a folded triangle of cloth. A flag. He carried it across the grass to the picnic table. He set it down next to Danny's. He didn't say a word. He just put it there. Then he turned and walked a few paces back. A heavy man with a navy patch did the same thing. From his hard case, a different flag. He set it down beside the first 2. Then another. Then another. The flags came, one after another. Some men carried them out of their saddlebags. Some carried them out of the inside pockets of their vests. Some had folded ones tucked in zipped compartments they hadn't opened in 20 years. The picnic table filled up. They started putting them on the bench, then on the grass in front of the bench. Brothers nobody had ever fully grieved. Sons, husbands, friends, names that lived only on those small white tags now. 26 folded flags by the end. 26 names. 26 men. Earl looked at the rows of triangles. He understood then what he had been carrying alone. And he understood that he had never been alone in carrying it. He looked at the small boy still holding on to his leg. "Caleb," he said. The boy looked up. "You don't know what you just did, son. Did I do something bad?" Earl laughed. A real laugh this time. Loud. Cracked. Honest. "No, son. You did something nobody else could do for 53 years. You said the thing." Hammer walked up. He knelt in front of Caleb so they were eye to eye. The big white-bearded old man and the small brown-haired boy. "What's your name, soldier?" Hammer said. "Caleb. Caleb Foster. Caleb Foster. You listen to me, son. You understand what I'm telling you." The boy nodded. "You just did something today that medals can't do. That speeches can't do. That 50 years of remembering can't do. You walked up to a brother of mine and you put your hand in his hand. You asked him the one question he needed to be asked. And you didn't even know you were doing it." Hammer reached up and unpinned a small enamel patch from the front of his own vest. The Iron Cross. The chapter's oldest and rarest emblem. He held it out to Caleb. "This belongs to you now, son." Caleb looked at his mother. Sarah was crying so hard she couldn't speak. She just nodded. The boy took the patch. After the standing came the quiet. The men did not sit down all at once. They stayed on their feet for a long time. Some walked over to the picnic table and stood for a few seconds in front of the rows of folded flags. Some made the sign of the cross. Some just put their hand flat on top of one of the triangles and then took it away again. Eventually, slowly, the gathering began to breathe. Earl was still sitting on the bench. Caleb was leaning against his arm now. The boy had his small enamel patch closed up in his fist like a marble. He had not let it go. Sarah came over. She sat down on the other side of her son. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I should have stopped him. I didn't know what he was going to." "Ma'am," Earl said, "please don't apologize for him. Don't ever." She nodded. She couldn't look at him. She was looking at her hands. "I'm Earl Whitman. Sarah Foster. Caleb told me his father is overseas." She nodded again. 7 months in. 7 to go. "What unit?" She told him. He nodded slowly. He knew the unit. He knew the part of the country they were in. He didn't say what he knew. He just nodded. "He's going to come home, Sarah." She looked at him then. She knew it wasn't a promise. She knew nobody could promise that. But she also knew the way an old soldier says a thing like that, and she nodded, and she let herself believe it for a few minutes, because a few minutes of believing was what she needed. Hammer was a few feet away. He had been listening. He turned and walked back into the crowd of bikers. He had a quiet word with 3 or 4 of them. Heads went down. Heads came up. A decision was made the way decisions get made in a brotherhood, without anybody putting it to a vote. He walked back to the picnic table. "Sarah," he said. "Ma'am, we'd like to ride with you." She looked up. I'm sorry. Your husband's gone for the next 7 months. You and your son are alone. That's not gonna be the case anymore. Anytime you need a ride somewhere. Anytime you need a man around the house to fix something. Anytime your boy needs to be around men. You call us. We have 100 numbers in this chapter. You'll have all of them by tomorrow. Sarah's mouth was open. She didn't know what to do with her face. You don't have to do that. Ma'am. With respect. Yes, we do. She started crying again. Different kind of crying. Caleb climbed into her lap and let her hold him. Earl reached across and squeezed Hammer's wrist. Hammer nodded. It went on like that for a while. The bikers came up one by one. Some shook Earl's hand. Some just put their palm on his shoulder. Some kissed the top of Caleb's head before they walked away, the way uncles kiss nephews. Wrench knelt in front of the boy and pinned a smaller patch to the front of his little jacket. That makes you family, Wrench said. You understand what I'm saying? The boy nodded. Anything goes wrong. Anything at all. You tell your mama to call. You hear me? The boy nodded again. Wrench stood up. His knees cracked. He turned away and put his bandana back on his head and walked back to his bike without looking back, because that was the only way he could walk away. Eventually it was time to ride. Earl stood up from the picnic table for the first time that day. He picked up Danny's flag. The other 26 had been carefully gathered up by their owners. Each man carried his brother back to his own saddlebag. The picnic table was empty again. Earl walked toward his bike. Caleb walked with him, holding the corner of his vest. When they got to the bike, Earl took the little green plastic soldier out of his vest pocket. He looked at it. He looked at the boy. He started to hand it back. Caleb shook his head. That's for Danny. Earl smiled. He put the soldier in his vest's inside pocket, the one right over his heart. He patted it gently. You're a good man, Caleb Foster. The boy looked up at him. Are you going to be okay, mister? Earl looked out at his brothers. 200 men settling back onto their bikes. 200 engines about to come alive. He looked at the small boy holding the corner of his vest. He looked at Sarah, watching from the picnic bench with her hands over her heart. Yeah, son, he said. I think I am. He climbed onto the bike. He started it. The big engine rumbled to life. All around him, 200 others did the same. The sound built. It became one long, deep note, the kind of note that lives in your chest before it lives in your ears. Caleb stepped back to stand with his mother. Earl looked over his shoulder one more time. He found the boy in the crowd. He raised one hand. He held it there. Caleb raised his hand back. The bikes began to roll. Earl took his usual place at the front of the line, the way he had every year for 51 years. But this time, the man at the front was not carrying his brother alone. This time, his brother was riding with him. He didn't cry on the way out. He just rode. And here is the thing about that day. 26 grown men had been carrying 26 folded flags. None of them had ever said it out loud. None of them had ever lined the flags up on a table where they could see each other. None of them had ever stood up in front of each other and let their grief be witnessed. It took a 6-year-old boy with a plastic soldier in his pocket. It took one simple question, asked without an agenda. It took a child who tells his father he loves him every night on the phone, because nobody ever taught him to be ashamed of saying it. Children sometimes know what grown men have spent a lifetime trying to find words for. And sometimes a brotherhood of 200 men will stand up. Not at attention. Not in formation. Just on their feet. because a child has said the thing they could not say to each other. For Danny, for Mark, for the brothers in the saddlebags, for all of them,